Could I have the next slide, please? So while everyone is still arriving, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the Every Learner Everywhere Expert Network powered by ISTE. In January, Every Learner Everywhere launched the Expert Network to offer professional learning and coaching for higher ed faculty and leaders to support their students through and beyond the COVID crisis, including the transition to digital learning. We encourage you to visit the Expert Network website. We are posting the link in the chat for you to get more information and also for you to schedule your coaching session. Next slide, please. Welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning Interactive Conference Series. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I am the manager for network programs and services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to take just a few minutes to tell you about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of 12 higher education organizations with expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practice. Every Learner Everywhere is one of 3 solution networks sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The other 2 networks focus on advising and developmental education. Here at Every Learner, we work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and students of color. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's presentation, which we will share with you after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, we welcomed your questions in the Q&A section. If participants raise their hand during the presentation, we will not be able to unmute them. However, we will be monitoring the Q&A and chat sections. As a biology professor and a former associate dean, I'm excited about today's discussion, Every Learner Everywhere, Any Place, Anytime. Our speakers today are Kristen Fox, Managing Director, and Nandini Kadkar, Principal from Titan Partners, which is an Every Learner Everywhere network partner organization. Kristen joined Titan Partners in 2018 as a director in the strategy consulting practice. Kristen has spent 15 years working as a consultant and advisor to institutions, businesses, and nonprofit organizations that operate in the education space. Much of her career has been spent working with post-secondary sector, where her work has enabled clients to develop and launch new products, create and execute on growth strategies, achieve accreditation, identify cost savings opportunities, improve fundraising results, and facilitate strategic planning. Kristen holds a BA in International Relations and Chinese from Colgate University and a MA in International Affairs and Economic Development from the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego. Nandini joined Titan Partners in 2018 as an associate in the strategy consulting practice. Before joining Titan Partners, she was the founding operation manager for Excel Academy Charter High School in East Boston, where she was a 2017 Education Pioneers Visiting Fellow. She worked to scale operations for the growing school with a focus on assessment, family relations, and staff support. Prior to Excel Academy, she worked at McMaster Car Supply Company in Atlanta, Georgia. She improved upon supply chain processes and helped design a warehouse move. Nandini has a BS in economics from Duke University. Go Blue Devils. I will now hand it over to Kristen and Nandini.
Thank you so much, Norma, and appreciate the warm introduction. I think perhaps more relevant in terms of my background and bio is one of the things that I started out doing earlier in my career is teaching undergraduate writing and global history courses when I was part of the UC system. So have great appreciation for and have enjoyed our work looking at the experience of introductory faculty teaching throughout the pandemic. Both Nandini and I are really excited to share with you insights from our work across the last year. and our work more broadly, working with institutions and faculty to help understand how to adopt digital learning strategies and approaches and scale them across institutions, and to take the experience, which has been COVID-19, and understand where those silver linings are in terms of lessons for pedagogy and ways that we can more equitably serve students. So thanks so much for spending time with all of us, with us here today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nandini, who's going to describe the research initiative and context, and then what we're going to walk through in our time together.
Thanks, Kristen. The one bit I would add to my bio as well is I hear that many of you are at Wright State. Shout out to Dayton. I grew up in Beaver Creek. Hope all is well. I'm sad to not be there right now. But we are here to talk to you about the research that we conducted from last April to November to try to understand the experiences of faculty during the sudden switch to remote teaching and then the fall term like none other. Over this period of time, over 8,000 faculty, many of whom might be on this webinar now, thoughtfully shared their perspectives with us, and we thank you for that. There were a couple of core goals to this work. First, to measure the faculty and institution response to COVID-19, including challenges faced, professional development provided, and instructional materials adopted. Second, to really determine the longer term shifts in modality and or pedagogy that might be accelerated because of this. And then lastly, to really curate information for both institutions and providers across the higher education landscape. Throughout this work, we produced 3 reports, which Joyce is putting in the chat right now for you to see. And they're all hosted on the Every Learner Everywhere website. And we're happy to take any questions that you might have as you look through those. So to start off, we have 5 key learning outcomes. We will focus on understanding faculty sentiment about online teaching and learning, knowing how instructors, quote unquote, rate their institutions and where they call for more support, identifying key pedagogical challenges that arose and course design strategies to address those. And then we'll close with understanding implications for equity and learning about new resources for selecting and navigating digital tools. Now, while I'm sure none of you have forgotten, I want to start with a few facts. Last spring, 91% of faculty transitioned a course to emergency remote teaching format. And for many of you, that probably happened over a weekend. And then last fall, 2/3 of faculty taught fully online and 24% taught in either a hybrid or highly flexible format. 76% of faculty had to adjust their course from the modality it was typically taught. So if in pre-COVID it was taught in hybrid, maybe it was taught online. If in pre-COVID it was taught fully in person, maybe now it was taught in a hybrid or fully online format. And in order to enable that, 72% of you integrated new digital learning tools. This affected the experience of over 17 million undergraduate students. And 17 million, at least for me, is kind of a hard number to interpret. So I looked up some facts. 17 million is also the number of people in the Netherlands. So if that helps you understand the scale, there it is. And we understand that this experience was hard. So Kristen, if you go to the next slide, we have some cool graphics to show. And the fall term left many of you feeling exhausted and challenged as you worked to make shifts to your courses and to support your students. Some of the most common words we heard from you were exhausting, challenging, and there are very real reasons why. You push the limits of your textbooks, your courseware, your instructional tools to really maximize the effectiveness and what you could communicate to your students. You also supported your students, sometimes all the time. You stayed up all night to answer emails to make sure that you were giving them what they needed. And simultaneously, you worked to make those courses equitable. You recorded your lectures so that your students who were also parents could watch it on their own time when their kids were sleeping. And we're hearing that all this work is creating a positive impact on the perception of online learning. What you see here is some people colored in green, gray, and red. And last spring, we heard that 45% of faculty reported a more positive sentiment in online learning than they did pre-COVID. And this sentiment has persisted. We see, and Kristen will go into this in a little bit more, that there are challenges associated with this. But this positive sentiment has come with an increase in institutional support in professional learning that we will get into in just a minute as well. So Kristen, on the next slide, we see an increase in the quote unquote grade that faculty give their institutions in regards to digital learning. So what you really see, what you're seeing here is the percent, and this is the green bar, the percent of faculty that say my institution is achieving an ideal digital learning environment. And you notice between those second and third bars that there's a big jump. We go from about 35% to just over 50%. And 50% is good. It means that institutions are rallying around their students and their faculty, but 50% is only 50%. We do see some differences in this number. Of those 50%, they are more likely to have professional learning available. And they're also more likely to be in institutions where they have resources available for them, like centers for teaching and learning, roles and units focused on online learning, and established peer-to-peer networks. Some of these might be things that all of you have engaged with as well. Lastly, I want to look at the two bars on the right, the difference between two-year institutions and four-year institutions. Faculty at two-year institutions where we are more focused on teaching, maybe less focused on research, tended to rate their institutions a bit higher. And we're digging in more into the why of this, but part of the reasons are also the institutional support available to really achieve a digital learning environment. And on that professional learning point, we see that institutions are ramping up their faculty support, but there is still a ways to go. We know that over the past year, yes, you have turned to your institutions for support, but you've turned to a number of other resources as well, including professional associations, peer-to-peer networks, the vendor community. Hopefully you've explored some of the options that our partners in the ELE network provide, and that expert network that Norma showed us at the beginning and will be linked at the end as well is another resource you can take advantage of. We see a slight uptick here in sufficient professional development. We're at about 50% of faculty who say that their institution was really able to support them. Lastly, before I hand it off to Kristen, I want to make a point on your resilience. Going into the fall term, almost 3/4 of you said that you felt prepared, but as you got into the fall term, you recognized some of those challenges that we've talked about before. And it was most challenging if you were teaching in a hybrid or a highly flexible environment. Working across the different modalities, students in different experiences created unexpected challenges about communication and grading and assessment that surfaced, and that are things that I'm sure you are all working through and that we will talk to in just a minute as well. I know that was very data heavy, and I'm going to hand it to Kristen, who will talk through some tactics. We're happy to take questions as they come through in the chat as well.
Yeah, please do feel free to chat in questions at any time, and we'll certainly respond to them. So there are 4 areas that we're going to hone in on a little bit, where we heard from faculty like you, and specifically our focus here was on, or where we're focusing this part of the conversation is on the experience of faculty teaching introductory level, general education, and often high enrollment courses. And so what we're going to talk through are some things that we learned and heard about techniques to engage students, and how faculty are thinking about that challenge. Lessons related to course design and redesign, ongoing concerns and ways that institutions and faculty are addressing equity gaps, and then also share some a new resource that's in beta that you can use to discover high quality courseware tools and other digital learning tools. So first and foremost, what we heard from faculty from spring, and it persisted through until this fall term, was that 70% of faculty, the vast majority, said keeping my students engaged was the most challenging part of the transition to emergency remote teaching, but it continued to be a challenge into the fall. And so you can see this quote here. right? Where especially in the spring, but again, even persisting into this past fall term, students were overwhelmed. This was across all disciplines, right? This, I'm sure you all experienced this in your work, where students were overwhelmed by family obligations, work obligations, and other stressors and health stressors at being able to engage in their learning. And many students as well had varied abilities and experience working themselves with digital tools and technologies. So things as simple as, that seem as simple as turning on and off a camera for appropriate engagement with learning content are areas where students themselves weren't equipped. So what we heard from you all is that this was an area that you worked incredibly hard to really engage students in their learning, and that it continues to be a priority moving forward. So 74% of faculty told us that increasing student engagement is a priority, was a priority for this fall term and will be for this current spring term as well. And so strategies that we heard faculty apply in these areas were really around thinking about, setting students up for success and teaching them how to learn to be effective in online settings, orienting them to time management. And as you can see from this quote here from faculty teaching introductory level chemistry, really being clear about expectations around engagement in an online setting as being some of the ways that faculty successfully have grappled with this. One of the other things that we also continue to see from this work is just the really important role. So we asked about the important role that effective instructional practices play in improving satisfaction with student learning. And I'm going to describe what you're looking at here and also talk about how we replicated these results from the perspective of students, which is really important. So one of the things that we asked faculty about was the extent to which they engaged in the use of a list of high impact online instructional practices. And then we looked at the extent to which the number and range of those instructional practices used was associated with faculty perception of their satisfaction with student learning. And we did this same exercise based on student reported number of those instructional practices used in conjunction with our partner Digital Promise and students' satisfaction with their student learning. And again, saw the same result replicated. So what you're looking at here then is on the x-axis or the horizontal axis, the number of instructional practices used. And what you're seeing is that is positively correlated with the percentage of faculty saying that they are satisfied with student learning. And I'm going to show you the list that we used in that list of practices in the next slide. What we also found was that, you can see it's at about 7 where we see that, line go up even more highly in terms of that correlation of satisfaction with student learning. Only about 20% of faculty used that high volume of instructional practices. And so we asked ourselves, well, who are those faculty? What makes them different? And where are we seeing instructors use those greater number of practices? And what we observed were a few key things. One, prior experience, right? Experience matters. The more experience you have teaching online and deploying and practicing, the more practices you're using, right? And that makes sense. I know that the first term that I taught, I was a much less effective teacher than the second term that I taught. And then another thing that really mattered and had a statistical relationship here was the extent to which you had support as measured by professional development and learning, centers for teaching and learning, and other peer-to-peer networks and other mechanisms to support you. And so those are really important lessons for us to be thinking about in terms of how we equip faculty to make these modifications and to incorporate additional practices into their teaching. So here, what you're looking at, and Adrienne, you asked this question around what were the practices specifically that we looked at. So what we've done here, and so now we're looking at the percentage of faculty using instruction that reported using these practices on the horizontal chart, on the horizontal line. What you can see is that there are several practices for which there was pretty low adoption. And this was during the spring, so emergency remote teaching in the spring. That's the time period that we're looking at on this particular slide. Small group assignments were adopted at fairly low levels. Those activities with moderate adoption were things like modular activities, frequent quizzes, pre-recorded videos. You can see student self-evaluations and real-world examples. And those with high adoption were live sessions and personal messages to students. Notably, those areas that I've got boxed here were those areas where we saw a statistical significance and linkage between higher rates of satisfaction with student learning when these practices were used. And notably, I think what's really important to see here, though, is in online settings, we're seeing some of those most effective individual practices be used at lower rates. So that's something really important for us to be thinking about and considering. And we saw the usage of these practices rise a little bit as we went into the fall, but it's really important to take away that these are ways, right? Small group assignments and student self-evaluation where engagement, right? So if we think back to that, the prior point that engagement continues to be a real challenge, these are instructional strategies that can be used in online and in hybrid environments to really bring learning to life for students and engage them in their learning. So another thing that we noted and measured, and so I'm going to show you two slides here as we think about understanding equity implications and concerns that were exacerbated by the pandemic and the experience of students during the pandemic. So one of the things that we asked in the spring was the extent to which faculty changed learning outcomes and the extent to which they changed their form of grading. And so what you can see is 51% of instructors told us that they changed learning outcomes, and just over 70% said that they moved to a form of pass-fail grading, right? All really important in service of acknowledging the extreme stress and transition that students and institutions were and faculty were going through. But what we heard then, as we approached the end of the spring term, we heard faculty telling us that they were concerned about student readiness for the next term and concerned about remediation needs and ability to progress. And so you can see two quotes here that I think really make that point, right? The first being that, given the fact that online proctoring tools and various proctoring methods were not always available and have in some cases equity concerns themselves. We had students that were getting higher grades and where faculty felt that they were potentially not gaining the foundation to master the content. The other concern that we heard from faculty, particularly in lab-based courses and in courses where the lab experience had to be altered and adjusted very quickly, was that their faculty and you all were doing the best you could to give those experiences in real authentic ways. But the lack of the ability to truly, do those manipulations and to do that work was making it so some foundational understanding couldn't be acquired. So we were really concerned about this as we, heard and read through and did focus groups with faculty all throughout the spring, and as no news to you all, right? So what we did is this fall, we asked, at the end of November, how to go and how concerned should we be? And so what you're looking at here, I want to just orient you to, because it's important that you interpret this accurately. So this is faculty teaching introductory level courses. And on the left, it's the percentage who reported a change in the student drop rate. And on the right, and this was fielded again at the very end of November, so just as the term was ending, the percentage of faculty reporting an anticipated change in the failure rate in their course. And so what we saw and have heard really concerningly is at two-year institutions, 39% of faculty, almost 40% of faculty reported an increase in the student drop rate. That's consistent with what we've seen from National Clearinghouse data and otherwise, right? And in that way is, again, concerning about the ability for students to both enroll in, participate, and progress at community colleges. What we also saw and heard is a similar reported increase at four-year institutions. So 24% of faculty said that they were seeing a change in the student drop rate at their institution. Again, when we look at the anticipated failure rate, two-year institutions, 38% of faculty reporting an increase, and at four-year institutions, 29% of faculty reporting an increase. And one of the things so this is obviously something that we continue to monitor and continues to be, very important for us to all be thinking about, and is core to the work that we do at ELE, and thinking about how to adjust pedagogy and engage students and remediate quickly. But this will continue to be a key area that we collectively need to focus on, and where we know that many of you are working to support students, given what's going on both in their academic and outside of their academic lives right now. So what did we hear in terms of course adjustments that faculty said worked, and where we saw a connection with positive outcomes, right? So there are a few things that we heard and saw from faculty, both from the data as well as from qualitative interviews and conversations that we see that will persist and that have the potential to really change the faculty experience, and more importantly, or most importantly, the impact on students. So the first is the use of asynchronous pre-recorded materials. We heard from many faculty that this was really effective in being able to use class time to, again, more effectively engage students in their learning and to flip the classroom. And for students, right, this enables students to access content flexibly, as Nandini said earlier, and reduces barriers to participation, which is something that we heard from many faculty who moved to largely synchronous learning options in the spring. And this quote here really shows how important this can be in addressing equity gaps. And this is from a STEM instructor at a community college who told us, "My institution undervalues how vital asynchronous remote learning options are for equity and student success. Removing both geography and time and allowing asynchronous options clearly reduces the equity gap and improves student success. I've been pushing to continue remote teaching after the pandemic, but my department has reversed course and is requiring synchronous courses. It's clear in my sections, I've only had 5 of 75 students drop and everyone is passing. In a face-to-face section, I'd have at least 3 times the drops and significantly more students not passing. And it would be my Black and brown students that would fare worse in the face-to-face, and now everybody stays." So again, this is an example of when done well, right? And the use of asynchronous materials as one method can really have a powerful positive impact on reversing or addressing some of those higher DFW and failure rates that we saw reported in the prior slide. Related to that is the increased modularization of content and learning outcomes. And so here we heard and we know that this gives students better visibility into learning outcomes and what they need to learn. And for you all as faculty who are adjusting the course experience to meet students' needs in different ways and provide remediation, it enables the more flexible movement and redesign of courses. Thirdly, we heard faculty say, "I am using more frequent formative assessment to really check in with students on their learning, make clear their learning to them as well as to me so that I can adjust in real time." And that's something that I've been doing more during the pandemic because I've had to, because I can't see students' reactions on their faces. I can't see that glazed over look when a concept is missing them. And this is really powerful for me in being able to adjust instruction and identify struggling students. And again, importantly, this also gives students visibility into what they've mastered and what they still need to learn, which is really powerful for students who are working to plan and be successful around their own educational outcomes. Fourth, we heard faculty say, "Wow, it was really hard to adopt and use these new digital tools, and it was really painful. And I don't want to go through that again." You saw that red on the sentiment map that Nandini shared before. But at the end of the day, wow, I saw some real benefits to using some new ways to engage students and create collaboration amongst them, as well as to give myself input and insight into their real-time learning. We heard faculty tell us that the use of various digital tools enabled faculty to change how they spent their time and used their time. And we'll share a little bit more information about some of the things we're learning there in just a moment. But by using, a homework tool, or by using an adaptive courseware tool, I'm able as faculty to spend more time supporting students who need my help, as opposed to, delivering content, structuring content, delivering lectures. And then in terms of the impact on students, faculty told us, and what we heard again and again, is that, online discussion tools and different online discussion forums actually enabled students who were really quiet in a face-to-face setting, or might be hesitant to speak up, to engage more actively in the course with their peers, and in a way that felt safer for them. And so again, this use of both live as well as asynchronous class discussion is something that we saw many instructors use with great success. Last but not least, we heard that targeted and individualized outreach and support to students who need it most was something that was, critical for successful student instruction during this period of time. But what we also heard, and what you heard from my colleague Nandini as well, is that done without support, that it took so much time to do well, right? Individual emailing, individual outreach, individual touching base with 50 or more students in a course is incredibly time consuming. At the same time, tools, right, that can enable that to be done authentically and reaching out to students who need it most is incredibly important. And we heard from students, or from faculty, reporting that it provided students with encouragement, it provided them with support in seeking help, and particularly for those first generation students who who don't necessarily come, many don't come to a post-secondary education with that help seeking behavior. Having faculty reach out directly was incredibly valuable. But I know for many faculty, and for many of you, it was, again, incredibly time consuming, and many of you were the full face of the institution. So let's talk a little bit about what we learned about time. So one of the things that we asked faculty who responded to our surveys about was how they spent their time over the course of this past fall. And so now here, what we're looking at is faculty time this fall term. And so what you can see is that, so this is based on 14 hours a week was what was being spent on highest enrollment introductory level courses. What you can see, we've got this organized on the left are some of those activities that are more around preparation, right? So selecting or adjusting content and tools, preparing assignments, preparing for class, and then delivering instruction, providing support, student grading, and analyzing performance data to the right. Preparing for class and grading student work are those areas that took the most amount of time. The percentage that you can see, and you can see here that it's the percentage. So 17% of time was preparing for class. That equals 3.7 hours on a weekly basis, whereas grading student work is an average of 4.3 hours on a weekly basis. And what you also see is there are certain areas, so the percentage at the top is the percentage of faculty reporting they spent more time on these activities. And those places where you all told us that you spent more time were around preparing for class, providing support to students, as well as grading student work, and some of that prep work as well. A few things really important to know though, asynchronous teaching, doing it that first time and making those recordings and setting it up takes more time, but we see in future terms that time goes down. We also see that courseware has an impact on reducing time grading in particular. Well, not a huge and drastic reduction in time. It's about 40 minutes different on any given week. So you can see that there in that call out box on the bottom right. 4.5 hours a week for those who don't use courseware versus 4.1 for those who do. So we're continuing to look at this and look at how can digital tools implemented well not just save time, right? But it's about both giving you tools to make you more efficient, but more importantly, to make sure that the time that's being used in service of instructing students is on those most high value activities. Okay. So last thing that I want to talk a little bit about is around how we saw a change in the types of materials and resources being used over the course of the pandemic. And so what we are looking at here, and sorry, the labeling on this got a little bit skewed, but on the left, the light tan is in May. And then on the right, the darker tan is in the fall, for the fall term. And so what you can see though consistently across the board is that for the most part, instructors use the same core instructional materials, but what we saw was a real migration and where we saw change was around the use of an adoption of digital tools to supplement the student experience. That's that second selection choice down. And then the use of digital versions. We saw, of course, this huge migration to digital materials. And one of the things that we heard from you all was that it was really hard and time consuming to choose the right digital tools that were effective and helped solve the instructional challenges you were looking to in your courses, and also were easy for students to use. And what you can see here are a couple of quotes from instructors who shared with us some of the challenges here. You can see, so faculty teaching introductory education classes was, contacting vendors to get free software to enable students to apply hands-on practice. We heard this from students, and we heard it from faculty again and again. The variation, right, in tools and the user experience was really overwhelming and really stressful for students in addition, especially in the spring term. And so one of the things that we're seeing is more institutional curation of a set of tools that are kind of approved for courses, as well as help for faculty in choosing those tools that are going to be most supportive to students. Great. So what does this all mean? So what are things that you can be doing to support students in a variety of delivery formats? So we've talked a little bit about some of the foundational activities that are really important. So things like creating clear learning routines, things like incorporating assignments that enable you to gather information and share information back with students themselves about how they're doing in their learning, what they still need to learn, and areas in which they need to focus. But if we think about these other 4 themes that we've talked about, there are a couple of there are several actionable steps that you can take that can apply both in face-to-face as well as fully online settings and hybrid as well. So one of the things that has been an effective strategy around engagement is this incorporation of small group discussions and presentations. And obviously in a face-to-face format, that's a straightforward activity. In fully online formats, that can also be incorporated and in terms of discussion groups, in terms of asynchronous learning experiences. And one of the things that we've also seen being really important around setting standards and expectations for engagement and setting students up for success is to have those clear expectations set for what it means to be engaging in the course online, how frequently to be logging in, completing assignments, and really helping to orient students to learning online. So much professional development and time was spent at institutions over this period of time helping faculty be successful. And one of the things that we really heard too from instructors was, that's great, we need that, but we also need ways both within our courses and centrally across institutions to make sure that we are setting our students up for success. And where students were using digital tools prior to the emergency remote teaching switch in the spring, they were more effective in continuing to use them moving forward. It was a less stressful shift. In terms of instructional practice, you know, in a face-to-face setting, you're using a mix of lecture-based and active learning activities. And we would also say, you know, the best practice that we can bring into a learning experience from what was traditionally a fully online experience is the use of a mix of both synchronous and asynchronous activities. Again, there's really compelling information and evidence here that mix really allows all students to learn. It reduces barriers, and especially right now when we're seeing more and more challenges for students related to life and work barriers to time and unpredictability, this is a really effective tool in making sure that students can catch up, can rewatch something, and can learn effectively. In terms of remediation and support, and as we look at the concerning equity gaps that we're seeing and the fact that we are seeing those present themselves disproportionately at community colleges and at institutions that serve higher rates of Pell eligible students, and so, you know, are correlated with income and race. We see in a face-to-face setting, of course, you know, having office hours, having time available to provide students with help and support is really important, as well as you know, assessing student learning and proactively reaching out to students who are struggling. But in an online setting as well, some of the things that we can bring, you know, again, both into a face-to-face or hybrid setting, if we take the best of both of these worlds, the use of adaptive learning tools that enable us to assess student learning and to prescribe a learning path that then meets their needs is another really powerful and effective tool. And again, if we look at the role that courseware plays, it can also really reduce faculty time on activities that can free it up to be used in more student-facing activities. In addition, building in supplemental learning resources to support students is another on demand is another way to make sure that students can get access to support whenever they need it, whether that be at 11 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning, and when you're not there to help. And then last but not least, one of the things that's really important and in both a face-to-face and fully online setting, and that we've heard from faculty, is that it takes time to find high quality resources. And in a face-to-face setting, you're thinking about content and curriculum relevance. In an online setting, you're thinking about accessibility, you're thinking about integration, support for active learning and engagement, and a whole host of not only curricular related questions, but IT related questions. And so one place that we'd encourage you to look for support and guidance that I think can be helpful is a beta of a tool called Course Gateway that you can find at coursegateway.org. And this is a tool that has been co-developed with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And enables you to search for courseware tools, so high quality courseware tools and digital learning resources that have been evaluated and by a set of faculty and academic leaders using rubrics around their quality. So certainly this is a resource we'd encourage you to try out and give us any feedback on as well, as it's in its beta period. So with that, what we would love to do is take any questions that you may have, any comments that you may have, and we really appreciate you spending some time with us on this Friday afternoon.
Kristen, I do have a question.
Yeah.
On one of the slides, you were referring to the time that faculty spent grading when they had courseware versus when they weren't using courseware. And you said there was just a small reduction, about 40 minutes. I was curious if you got any other feedback from the faculty on that regarding how much time they ended up having to spend troubleshooting while they were using this courseware. I'm just speaking from experience, because it's like, as soon as you adopt this courseware, it's like you spend more time troubleshooting it. Second semester, it's not so bad. Third semester, you're doing better. But then the fourth semester, they're rolling out a whole new version and there's kinks again. So did you all get any feedback in terms of how much, what kind of a pain point there might be in terms of adopting courseware and the work that faculty have to do just on the troubleshooting side of it rather than grading?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we find, so we were covering a lot of ground here, and so we didn't ask that those questions specifically here, but we do monitor and do work looking at faculty courseware adoption and use of different tools in the classroom more broadly. And so one of the things that we find really makes a difference is how the type of support that you have and how courseware or any digital learning product is being implemented. And one thing we look at is Net Promoter Score or faculty satisfaction with courseware, as well as with student learning. And we find that when you are implementing with support, when you've got professional development from your department, that makes a difference. When we also see that over time, to your point, Norma, it becomes easier to use new tools the second time through, right, as opposed to the first time through. And so those are all factors that make a difference. And fundamentally, overall, we also find too that the extent to which the partner or the vendor courseware supplier that you're working with supports you also makes a difference.
Kristen,
Anything else you'd add on that, Nandini?
Yeah, just one thing, and that's that we've also seen over the course of the past year and really continuing forward is the presence of a course coordinator role. And this is somebody who could be a faculty member, but is really responsible for supporting all of the other faculty members in the adoption and usage of these tools, and can help mitigate some of these challenges in adopting early on. Can help create some cohesive resources for the entire department or for folks who are using all the same types of tools. That way, both faculty as well as students are becoming more familiar quickly. And Adrian, I see a question from you too. Kristen, if you wouldn't mind going back to our instructional practices slide. And I believe this is the one that we're talking about. So yes, Adrian, to answer your question, I think the difference here that we're talking about between lectures and sessions is they are both synchronous, but our students expected to be actively engaged and involved during that time. Live lectures can be streamed, more like how this webinar is being streamed right now, whereas sessions involve, and there was more detail in the actual description when we sent it out to our survey respondents, sessions involve more student engagement.
Yeah, more interactive. I think it said live sessions between students and the instructor, as opposed to a live lecture, which is more passive. And I saw that we had a question about will these be shared? Yes. The other comment I will also provide on this slide is we've continued to evolve and update this list of practices in accordance with the evidence base. And we actually just went out and asked an updated version of this question to faculty in February that we'll look forward to sharing in a future webinar, where we've got some really rich results, not just around the usage of these various practices, but also around the extent to which faculty feel ready and supported to implement some of these practices. For example, the use of data, which is not listed here explicitly, but is another practice that we have assessed the usage of. We find that it's something that faculty or instructors tell us that they value, but don't necessarily have the tools and ability to use all the time because they don't have access to student data in some cases. And then I saw Shelley asked a question about an asynchronous online setting. what are specific examples of how to incorporate small group activities? And I'd love to hear, since we're I can give a couple of ideas, but I would also invite anyone else who's experimented with some good pedagogy and practice there to weigh in the chat with any strategies that you've used as well. But discussion board-based small group, kind of giving a real world problem that students are then working together on an assignment on in their own time. So, I mean, the group work itself would need to have some synchronous connection to it potentially between students. But in terms of, when that is happening, can be up to the students themselves. So, giving an applied problem, an assignment that students are working together and assigned in a group to work on. One of the things that we heard from faculty reflecting on how you create small groups was actually really interesting, and some of the focus groups that we ran with faculty asking about group work during this period of time was that typically there's two approaches. You assign them, or you let students pick their own groups. And then there's do you assign, how do you take into account how well students are doing in the course? And one suggestion that we heard that I think is a really good one is around, forming those groups based on having students that are, students that are mastering and struggling with different concepts, right? So they can help one another in a group is actually really, really helpful. So being more directive in terms of, this is your group, this is what you're going to work on together, and thinking about which students to put together in a group was something that I think was really effective. And then I'm seeing too, someone just chatted, and I want to make sure folks can see this or hear this. Someone, Sherry, just chatted in a suggestion that in discussion groups, giving students roles helps engagement, kind of assigning who leads, who provides resources, who summarizes are good roles. Any other questions?
Kristen, I'm going to put you on the spot with one. We had a question that was, do we think going forward that there will be more digital learning or less? And I would love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, thank you, Hafsa. I hope I'm saying your name correctly for sending that question. So one of the things that we're seeing, so yes, we think that the use of digital learning pedagogies and tools is permanently increased because of this experience. That does not mean that all of us all the time want to teach in fully online settings, right? That is not what I'm saying. But what we're seeing is that, used well, the use of digital learning tools has real, we're seeing faculty tell us that they're seeing that real potential for, again, student engagement, collaboration, getting shy students to speak and engage in their learning. And also for the use of data to enable faculty to understand or to enable you all to understand where students are struggling and where they're not, and to direct intervention accordingly. So, we're seeing that in terms of our work with faculty, and you also see, suppliers and the ed tech industry really rushing to develop and evolve tools in ways that meet these needs of learners. And someone asked a really great question too around any data on the types of digital nudges that are effective in supporting students who seem to have ghosted a course. Is it better from the instructor or the student support offices such of advising? How much is too much and when do we give up? This is such a good question, and we could do a whole hour on this, right? Maybe we should on another one of these. But so a couple of quick thoughts on that. And first, I would say one of the things that we have heard more this fall than ever before is that students just stopped showing up or just disappeared, or it was, even highly instructors that had high amounts of experience in engaging learners in online or hybrid settings the usual tricks and techniques were not working because of what's happening in students' lives, the distractions, et cetera. So I would just start by saying that, right? So this has been a period of time like none other, as you know, the again, student enrollment and persistence data show us. In terms of is it better from the instructor or student support offices? I think we do some other work that another one of my colleagues leads around holistic advising. And what we find is that it's most effective when it is holistic and when there is partnership between the instructor and student support offices. And one of the things that we also found over this period of time, and we heard both from students and from faculty, is the extent to which a personalized nudge and the fact that someone cares can really make a difference. And so those are a couple of reflections on this. Nandini, feel free to chime in with anything else. And one place too, if you look on the Every Learner Everywhere website, we did do some work on learning analytics that I'd encourage you to look at as well, around some of the lessons learned around how learner data can be used for both good and some of the dangers, and making sure that we are using algorithms responsibly and ethically in service of motivating learners.
So we are running out of time. I'm sure this could go on for a little longer. I'm sure we could all come up with some wonderful questions and solve the world's problems in education tonight. I do want to thank Kristen and Nandini for a wonderful presentation. We do ask that our audience take a few minutes to complete our survey for today's presentation using the chat that we are putting in the, see, it's Friday, putting the link in the chat for you. If you've got something else right after the webinar, don't worry, we will send you the link to the survey when we send you the recording, to the link to the recording and the slide deck. I also did include the link to the slide deck ahead of schedule for those of you who are in attendance and are really anxious to see the slide deck. So that link is already there. As a quick reminder, we do encourage you to visit the Every Learner Everywhere website. We have a resources page with all sorts of pillar resources and assets, and we have a database called Solve that you can find all sorts of interesting things on, as well as these reports. We also have the Expert Network webpage as well, where you can get no cost one-on-one coaching if you so desire. So, thank you again to our speakers. Thank you to our audience for attending today's webinar. We do look forward to seeing you next week for our webinar called Adaptive Learning Beyond STEM from some of our colleagues at the University of Central Florida. And for those of you who are not in STEM and you're really asking us to do more non-STEM humanities, liberal arts kind of things, this is going to be a talk for you. So we hope to see you next week, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.